waiting for the... Okay. We welcome you to our the December 12th meeting of the Utah Transit Authority Board of Trustees, and I'm the board chair, Carlton Christensen. And let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll ask Kathy Griffith if she'll lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is our Safety First Minute with Dave Garris. Dave.
Thank you. Just want to, if you notice coming in this morning, a little something, since we just did the pledge, is that the flags in Utah and at UTA properties remain at half staff for the entire month of December in honor of George H.W. Bush. So they will stay at half staff for the rest of the month. Safety Minute, you have the poster up behind you. Our safety message, which was sent out last week, again, very applicable today. Slip, slips, and falls remain our #1 employee injury at UTA, and so we continually try to mitigate that. We have snow shovels at all of our doors. We have snow melt. Message that went out said to be proactive and use ice melt placed around near the building entrances. Wear shoes that provide good traction, so don't worry about looking good at this time of year. Just wear good traction. And keep your hands and arms free. We talked about this so that if there is something that happens, you have better balance and can actually respond to it. And then always like to bring 3 items to you. So UVX a week ago opened up and went into the corridor, but last Wednesday went out and on the coldest day of that week did the safety blitz with all the safety administrators down there, just handing out information and reminding folks to be safe around the new system as we change it a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dave. Next go item number 4, which is approval of the board meeting report of November 28th, 2018. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Beth Holbrook, trustee. I know that you know who I am. I just wanted to announce it as well. Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know where I was going with that. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the board meeting report of November 28th, 2018 as written. No substitutions.
Okay. Motion, and then I'll second. Any other discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Our next item is our public comment period. A little bit of a change from past agendas. We've just consolidated any public comment, and that includes any on resolutions that will be on our agenda, and would invite those at this particular period or this particular agenda item. That will also inform us as we go through other discussions if there's concerns that are to be raised, and so we certainly would welcome the comments during this period. Bob, do we have some?
We have 2 cards today. The first one's Claudia Johnson.
Okay. Claudia, if you would come forward, there's a standing mic there if you want to use that.
Pretty soon you're not going to even have to announce me. You're going to say she's standing up here. Hey, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to listen to what I have to say. Thank you for the increased frequency during part of the holiday season. Of course, I'd like to see longer hours of operation year-round, but I'll keep asking, okay? The holiday fare reduction I noticed by accident because I went online to verify that the meeting was 2:30 today, and I by chance saw something about that. So are you doing any kind of advertising? Is there any kind of promotion that's going out there? Do people know this? Do you have things at the track station saying, hey, look what we got going this week or now? I don't know. I haven't been riding the bus. I haven't even gone to the grocery store since before Thanksgiving. So I have no idea getting out in the public and seeing what's going on. But anybody I talk to has no idea that there was a reduced rate. My next question is, so Everybody only has 2 children in this state, am I correct? So you leave the rest of them home because now you can go down there for $15, but it costs you $5 for a youth rate to take the bus round trip. It attracts. It doesn't make any difference. Is there any way that you can reduce that for the youth that are in, now you can't say that are in school, are school age, which might be they may be 18 and be a senior, but the fact is that they can go at a reduced rate. So that's something to consider, at least especially at this time of year or holiday times, to get frequency. When you're paying the same amount for an adult versus a youth, you wonder. Now, again, you go to a movie and kids fork out $10, $15 to go to a movie, and I can't even afford that. So just something to think about and to consider. Make sure you don't leave your kids at home, and because you can't afford it, which is where some of my family is, actually most of my family is. They cannot afford it, so it's cheaper for them to bring their vehicle. I realize that free days on UTA is a difficult thing to have because there are some people that take full advantage of it because they can get out of the inclement weather, and I realize that is a difficult thing. Maybe it needs to be free for the youth. Again, that age thing. Again, if there's something at the track stations that says, hey, you don't have to buy a ticket, you don't have to use your pass because of, always look at this sign on this board because we have specials that come through that will help out. Are you doing anything on the buses, or is it only just website cruising? You're not like Facebook, so nobody goes into UTA just to cruise to see what you got to say. I did cruise, okay? And you got some great things to say. You got some great things to toot on your horn. You've got some great things that have been happening and that have happened. But the public doesn't know it. And of course, and I'm sorry, the news media will do the best they can, but they got other things. So
I think your time's expired, but do you have a final statement, though? I
just want to thank you for listening and putting up with me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Our second card is George Chapman.
Okay. George?
Okay, a lot of things to talk about. The transit use grants from the county should be used, and you still have a chance to influence the city and the county to use those funds for Redwood Road and State Street. Yesterday, they approved a whole bunch of transit projects, and I'm kind of disappointed that the public wasn't actually involved in it. The proposals were approved before anybody spoke on them, and that's not the way things are supposed to happen. It makes you look bad, even though you had nothing to do with it. It was county, you know these people, and Helen confirmed everything was approved before the public hearing, so it did make sense, but it's important that you use those funds for Redwood Road and State Street expansion because you're not doing it right now. How come? The city keeps saying that Second South is the most used route, and they got a whole bunch of funding from the grants yesterday, but Redwood Road and State Street are much more, 2 or 3 times more used. So I encourage you, UTA, to work with and lead Salt Lake City and the county into better project proposal uses. I mean, this was throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stuck. Everything stuck. Also, Life on State is getting a bunch of stuff. You should be involved in that. I don't agree with the BRTs on State Street. I don't agree with the BRT in Taylorsville. And when you do the marketing, please don't do what you did in Utah County and say the only way to get high frequency every 6 minutes is to have a BRT. That's not true. Everybody knows a bus can do 6-minute frequency also. So please don't market it like that. Also, you're removing the 4 South bus stops. I don't understand why, by the library. That doesn't make sense at all. When in the phase 2 of proposal with you, they're going to put more stops on 4 South. So you take away stops and then make Salt Lake City pay for more stops. Something's not connecting there. again, you should be advertising the fair pay. Every day on the bus, I see people paying $2.50, and you really need fair pay to understand where the riders are coming from, where they're going. Fair pay does that. That's worth it. And $1.50 for a bus ride, you should be getting more than 3% riding the bus. Okay. Come on.
Thanks, George. Any other comments?
No other comment cards.
Okay. All right. Next, go to our agency report and to our interim executive director, Steve Meyer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items I'd highlight. Change day took place on December 3rd. We had major changes that included the initiation of ski service and the front runner schedule. Those changes to front runner schedule are on the slide here and shows the trends in monthly reliability. We were seeing a significant dip in reliability due to the implementation of positive train control improvements, primarily from Salt Lake to Provo, and then those impacts cascaded to the north. So
Steve, are those just during the implementation, or they're just likely to continue because of the extra safety feature?
Yeah, we think we can get back a little bit of that, but probably not all of it. We're still working through some hardware and software issues on that, so we'll know more in 2019 about how that goes. Okay. But now you can see things are trending back upwards. With that change this month, we've had 3 days over 90% reliability, and which is a big improvement. So it's showing that those changes were effective. On the positive train control front, we received approval on December 10th to enter what's called revenue service demonstration, which is a big milestone. That's from Ogden to Salt Lake. That's a different hardware and software system than the South. And so now we go through testing on that. We have to go make 383 trips without a failure to get that segment certified. So that's an important milestone to get that done. And we'll continue to work on that segment between Salt Lake and Provo. We started the service of the trolley bus, and excited to see that bus in service. I think that'll stand out to the patrons. That's a free ride due to the partnership with Farmington City, UTA and Prop 1 funds, and some businesses, the Station Park, Lagoon, and Hampton Inn there. So it's nice to see those kind of public-private partnerships to bring that kind of service to bear. And those are the highlights. Thanks.
Great. Our next item is our October 2018 financial report, and come to Bob Biles to give that to us.
Thank you. We'll look at the dashboard first. You'll see on the year-to-date, almost all of those are green. The one that's red is the diesel price. We've been talking about that for several months. You can see it at the gas pump too. Generally, we pay 75 cents less than you see at the pump for diesel. Just a rule of thumb there. Uh-oh.
Yeah. You should have given
Pushed the
yourself
wrong
just one
I
more
think
minute.
you might go a little longer.
At least you're consistent in how you're administering it.
Yes, that's right. Apply it to myself. And so for the current month, sales tax was down just a little bit below our projections. Operating expense was a little bit above our projections for the month. And again, diesel price was above what we budgeted for the current year. Take a little bit of time looking at sales tax collections. This is up from last month. The overall is the far right bar, 8.1%, being led by Salt Lake City and Utah County, 8.8 and 8.6%. Davis was down just a little bit, and then Weber's been up, as has Tooele. And again, the percentages of collection are shown there at the bottom, the percentage of the total sales tax that we receive. Looking at the 2018 expense through October 31st, these are similar to what you saw last month, with administration being under budget by about $3 million. paratransit 1.8 million, maintenance of way 1.6 million approximately. Commuter rail is over budget by 1.2 million. Again, that's affected by the diesel fuel primarily. And then bus is favorable by about $1 million.
Bob, can I ask, and you may not know this question, but is there any way for the agency to sort of buy fuels on a futures basis to sort of hedge their price?
There is. That's a financial agreement of some sort, and so actually I have a meeting scheduled in January to start talking about that with an agency who does that on the gas, natural gas, but we could also look at it on diesel also.
Okay.
We just need to understand that and be able to explain it, and that would go to the local advisory committee because it's a financial arrangement that I think falls underneath the new legislation, and then it would come to you. So, long answer to say yes,
You're
we could do that.
At what that might look like. Okay.
And then here's the variance by type of expense. Again, utilities. That's being driven by propulsion power, about 1.1 million. The fuel, we're over budget by about 1.2 million, which is where you would expect us to be about 20 cents over. Each 10 cents is about $600,000. Services, a lot of that is due to professional, technical, other services, and legal fees, where we're under budget on all those. Wages and benefits, it's a bit of a, when you look inside of it, it's a little bit of an allocation of how we did the budget between regular wages, overtime, and the vacation sick leave. So when we do the budget, we calculate what personnel costs will be, then we allocate it among the various categories. So overall, it's favorable 2.4 million, but our allocation within that was a little bit off. And so we use that as we go forward into the next budget to try to true those up.
And do you anticipate full hiring when you do your budget? I mean,
we assume everyone's here, every position's filled every day of the year.
Okay.
And so you would expect that we would have a favorable variance almost all the time. And that's the quick financial report.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to accept the October 2018 financial report.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the October 2018 financial report as presented by staff.
Second, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Our next item is a resolution ratifying the adoption of the 2019 budget. And Steve and then Bob, I don't know which one of you are leading out on this update discussion.
I was just going to just briefly introduce that we appreciate the public comment and the interest we had into that. We also presented that at the Regional Planning Committee in Utah County and with Davis and Weber County as well. So we did try to reach out to the different counties and share that information with the elected officials. Turn it over to Bob.
So in today's presentation, we'll go over the changes from the tentative budget to the final budget. We'll do it by the major segments. In your packet, you've got a spreadsheet that shows Exhibit B, that shows these individual items and how these relate to. So just going over that Exhibit B. So on the operating revenue, there were some changes. We decided we should put in a full year for the Salt Lake City service, so we agree with the numbers that Salt Lake City's seeing. And so that was about $1.5 million. We did a little more analysis on Senate Bill 128. What that did is it stopped motor vehicle registration coming directly to us from Salt Lake City. Instead, it substituted a sales tax that comes from UDOT. Initial estimates are that's about $500,000 more than we would have received from the motor vehicle registrations. The Salt Lake County, we had an agreement with the S-Line support with the double tracking that just went in. So that's about $500,000 a year for 3 years. We do anticipate they may pay that all up front, but for budget purposes, we're just showing that particular year. And then the estimated revenue from vehicle and equipment disposal, what was in the tentative budget was a net number of $500 cost. We're grossing it up to show the total revenue as well as the total expense. And so that gets us to the $456,754,000. This is what it looks like on Exhibit A, getting from the tentative budget to the final budget. That's where those changes were placed. So Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County are the major ones, then the motor vehicle registration, UDOT, and then the other revenues. The total change, $2.5 million. So the operating expense, same thing. We've got $2.5 million worth of changes. The first two are related to the Salt Lake City service agreement. There's really two pieces of that. One is the operations, and that's $1,360,000. And then the rest of it is the financing for the bus leases. There'll be 10 buses purchased, they'll be leased, and that gets us to the full yearly amount there. I'm going to skip the next one, the early debt retirement reserve, and head to the leasing costs. For the 2018 leases, we'd anticipate we would use some 5339 grant funds to lower the cost on the 12-year buses. Instead, we applied that to the depot district, and so that will reduce the bonding that we need to do on the depot district. It just meant the leases had to finance that much more this year. It was a little bit over $3 million.
In that calculation, are you assuming then that the interest rate or the cost of funds for the lease is cheaper than if you'd gone for the bond?
That would be true.
Okay.
Yes, the lease cost was around 3.3%. I don't have the exact number, but it's about 3.3% on the 12-year. You know, we're estimating when it comes to 2020, it might be 4.5% on the actual bond issue.
Okay. Okay.
The Information Technology Group looked at their budget, found that there were some changes that need to be made, mainly for professional services and some licensing costs on the software that we have, and just recalculated those. The passport-related fees, Passport's our mobile ticketing app, and we looked at those fees. The good news is they're going up because there's more revenue coming in. So we just trued those up. And then here's the vehicle and disposal where we gross those up. We had some personnel cost reductions. We had some positions that that became vacant since the tentative budget was prepared, and we changed those positions, and it lowered the cost. And then go back to the early debt retirement reserve. That's the number it took to balance.
Okay. That just goes, I guess, to that reserve fund that at what time we have bonds to call,
That's
at
correct.
least can use those funds in that behalf.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's 2022?
2022 is your first call date.
Okay.
And so this is how it looks if you look at Exhibit A and how those changes run through. Now, I didn't talk about the change to bus, paratransit, and operations support here. We had the Salt Lake City service with some preliminary allocations in those amounts. And we decided that we were premature in allocating that, and so we've put those all under Salt Lake City service, $4,950,000.
If I guess it doesn't really change the parameters in which we provide paratransit, right? Because most of those enhancements are along existing lines. So that service area doesn't broaden really with that service, right? We just might have more. Okay.
Correct. So on the operating expense side, it's about $1.5 million, and then you go to the principal and interest, $142,000. between the Salt Lake share and then the lease amount. And then the contribution to early debt retirement was up 530-some thousand. You'll note some small differences between the slides, it's rounding. So that was the operating side. Then we go over to capital. From the tentative budget, 125 million, we get to 141 million in the final budget. Most of that's the depot district. We went ahead and programmed that for next year. As we looked at one of the projects, we had a red light enforcement project that you'll see that it's the fifth one down, I guess, that we had scheduled for 2020, and we scheduled bond funds for that. As we looked at that, we decided we were premature on having that project. We don't have the information yet from the federal government on how to do that. So since there were bond funds, we looked at ways to reallocate those bond funds to projects we were already using some bonding on and some local share, and we just made it all bonding because they were bond eligible. So what that did is it freed up $5.3 million for other projects, primarily the light rail overhaul of local dollars. And so you'll see the local funding going up for these projects. But that's because we used bond funds to free up those local dollars. There were some projects that we added. I'll talk about that on the next slide. But this is where the money comes from, mostly from local partners, almost $900,000, the state $250,000, and then our share is about $150,000. Talked about the reallocation of bond funds. It's a zero net effect. And then we found a couple of projects that were duplicated in our tentative budget. And so we just removed those. So on the revenue side, this is how it looks. Obviously the grants are up quite a bit, $10 million. You can see the local partner contribution, state contribution, the bond proceeds that we planned on spending in 2020, some of it coming into 2019 now. And then the UTA funding is about 2.6 when you offset the various items. On the expense side, obviously the depot district programmed those funds in. There's the increase in those projects, the light rail overhaul, the tracks power station project. I think that's right, TPSS.
Traction Power Substation.
What is that? I'm sorry.
Traction Power Substation.
Traction powers. Okay.
Thank you. And then the TC1, that's one of our timekeeping systems that just needs to be upgraded. It's no longer being supported. The new projects were the UView Hub, $400,000, the Sharp-Tenic, which I think you've talked about at your last meeting. That's about $100,000, and then Point of the Mountain Alternatives. And most of that's being funded by other groups. And then again, the reallocation of the bond funds to the various projects, that was a net zero. And then eliminating the duplicate projects, which included 2 buses that we had in there that shouldn't have been in there, and then the Southwest Salt Lake County study. And then that's the net changes to the capital expense. Increased state of good repair by $4.2 million. And then the other capital projects, again, mainly the depot district there. And then the final thing, the debt service, the changes there, again, you can see it's the leasing payment of $316,000 and Salt Lake City buses of $125,000. Be open to any questions you might have.
Can I ask, on the slide just before, the Salt Lake City buses are really also a lease payment, right, I assume?
Correct. That's
Okay.
lease payment.
It's just what we're attributing to that agreement.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that.
And Bob, I just had a quick question. In terms of the same issue, the Salt Lake City buses, those would actually not be ordered till January 2nd, right, for the 19 budget, and that's how that's going to be, or are those already ordered? How does that exactly work since we're doing a full budget year?
I understand those have been ordered already
Okay.
because they need to be here in time to provide the service, and there's a long lead time.
So if something did happen with that Salt Lake City agreement, we would just manage that with our overall fleet replacement, so it wouldn't be wasted, there wouldn't be excess buses here. We just
We have the
modify our.
ability
Just integrate them.
on the other timing of the other these new
Correct.
buses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions, Beth? You
No
have?
further questions.
If none, I would entertain a motion on this, excuse me, the adoption of the 2019 budget.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, or I'd like to ratify Resolution R 2018-12-01 to adopt the budget as presented today.
Second, we'll go to a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is a resolution giving notice and setting our regular meeting dates for the calendar year of 2019. And I'll just maybe give a little bit of background as to what we're thinking as a board, and also helping to facilitate discussions, and also to have what we hope is a sort of a progressive information source or process that will help us lead to our ultimate decisions. Whether we're we're a three-member board, whether we have 2 people here or 3 people here, it gets difficult and challenging, really, to make sure we're in compliance with the open meetings law if we have briefings or discussions that that lead to decisions that would in anything other than a public meeting. And so, as we considered what would lend itself to both giving staff the opportunity, even at the early onset of a project or an item, to bring us and tell us, here's what we're working at, and especially if they're looking for feedback from us, or asking us to give some direction, to be able to have that even maybe over a series of multiple meetings. And so to facilitate it and to facilitate some other aspects of our board operations, we're proposing to set our meeting schedule on a weekly basis on a Wednesday morning. These could be short meetings. They could be as short as probably 20 minutes by the time we got through everything, or it could be 2 or 3 hours, what the length of the discussion is. We expect, and in fact that briefing table is probably a little too far away. We expect it to be a fairly intimate conversation, which the public is certainly welcome to come and to listen or to follow online as they can through our Facebook broadcast. And we will, in those meetings, if there's actions to be taken as far as contracts to be approved or other things, those can be done in those particular meetings. And I think as we have those discussions, and we anticipate something might come back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, or who knows, depending on the nature of the thing, in a series of meetings, and we'll have the next phase of that discussion. And so we're hoping to, we know we're in the process of hiring some new staff that were anticipated, but hopefully that'll lessen some of the administrative burdens. We know that we'll probably look at some software to facilitate the agenda creation process. We want folks to feel like this is really the opportunity to bring things to us as a board, and we'll have an internal process that will set some timings of if you want something on the agenda, when you have to have those items submitted and for discussion, and that'll also help us keeping both in the letter and the spirit of the open meetings law. And so I think and I'll let Beth give her perspective. I think we felt like this would be the most productive way. We've anticipated a few times where just we know of some conflicts. We know we'll have some times where something will come up, interim day or something where we need to appear, and in those cases we'll, to the best we can, give advance notice of cancellation of meetings. But at least to set the premise for the 2019 year, we wanted to set the agenda with the dates that we've indicated in our resolution. Beth, any additional thoughts that you have? Or?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I thought, that we had a really good dialogue with staff and amongst ourselves in terms of what is it that we anticipate moving forward. And we went with this time frame or this timing consciously, obviously to set it as an existing calendar item, Wednesday mornings, but also, 9 a.m. We felt like that was a little bit more helpful for people who maybe wanted to attend in person occasionally or have some other things that they wanted to bring forward. And so that's what we're hoping to establish with this. And as Carlton mentioned, it really did have, we really are looking to really enhance and continue that level of transparency that we're wanting to achieve. So we hope that this is going to be doing that. Again, there could be opportunities or times where it's not going to work, but we're going to really make sure that the notifications get out there so that everybody is understanding where we are at. So thank you.
And I would, having been staff once, I will throw out there that if, staff doesn't have something on the agenda, we won't consider it a black mark if you're not in that particular week's meeting. You're certainly welcome to be here, and we'd invite that, but we don't. We know that it may not even be as well attended as our typical monthly meeting, but we also feel like as we go through some of these discussions and reach decisions, nothing's intended to creep up on anybody when it comes time to make decisions. Certainly, I think both the public and us will have lots of opportunities to have comment and give feedback. So. Steve, any other thoughts that you have? Are you?
Chair, I'm just appreciative of the board willing to take this on a weekly basis. I think, as you mentioned, the ability for staff to gather here and stakeholders and talk about these issues in an open forum will be helpful to the agency and to the public.
Well, we appreciate you and your staff and your willingness to entertain this concept, and so we look to have it be successful. With that, and if there's no other discussion, I entertain a motion for approval of this particular resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve R 2018-12-02, the resolution giving notice and setting our regular meeting dates for calendar year 2019 as submitted.
Second, go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
Thank you. It's unanimous.
Thank you. Our next item is with Dave Garris, and a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of the authority's amended transit agency safety plan. And I will just say, Dave, before we were just meeting with the FTA administrators, and they said, well, this is coming about a year from now. And I said, wait a minute. And I grabbed the agenda. I said, I think we're potentially approving it today. So they were quite impressed that you're at this point, but we look forward to what you have to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We say at UTA that safety is always first. It is a core value of ours, but we like to be ahead of the game. And so UTA is ahead of the actions on safety in many, many different ways. This is one of them. And the resolution you have in front of you today is generally asking two things: that the board approve our transit agency safety plan, and that you designate our acting interim executive director as the accountable executive. That is a new term that is throughout the legislation. This became part of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act several years ago. It gave the FTA more authority and additional requirements for enacting safety throughout the agencies that have rail safety plans. And so what you have in front of you and what we'll send out in the packet is our transit agency safety plan. This is a requirement to be compliant a year from now. We actually transitioned our system safety program plan to a transit agency safety plan 2 years ago. So we are looking to get this 49 CFR 673 certified by our state safety oversight this year. If that's the case, we'd be the first transit agency in the U.S. that would get that approval. So it has been in the format. And as you see, the other item is that transit agencies have to convert and transition to a system safety management system certification. And those are the 4 pillars that you see on the front of our transit agency safety plan. Again, SMS is a requirement in 2020. UTA has been SMS certified since 2013. So we've already had that certification. Therefore, it is easy for us to transition. Transit agency safety plan is updated throughout the year. We keep red line version and then provide those changes to our regional general managers, our senior managers, and then last week presented them to VPC for any comments and corrections. We are in alignment with our state safety oversight, our SSO, who will grant us the approval of the 673 certification. He has an update. Jim Golden is our state safety oversight. He has standards and procedures, which he also updates every year. This version, the 2019 version of our TASP, as it is referred to, is in compliance with his updated standards also. So the motion that you have in front of you is to accept this as our transit agency safety plan. And again, UTA has one safety plan. We do not have a safety plan for different modes. Therefore, we can do things the same way, and our employees don't get confused on what mode am I. You just do it the same way on all the modes, which has benefited us significantly. And then designate Steve Meyer as the accountable executive who can sign this. The other thing that UTA does is we have all RGMs and executives sign this document, and so we all are buying into this every year. Thank you, sir.
One question, and I think I know the answer, but as you went through the formulation of this plan, did any of your sort of current practices have to change, or did you find that that you were really, the plan is really reflective of your current operation?
It's very much reflective. What did have to change is notifications that we have to provide. We gave you a briefing a couple days ago on the FRA and the FTA and at what level. That continues to change at the FTA, so this is current with the existing notification limits for incidents and accidents. That's the biggest change. Otherwise, UTA is noticed as having best practices on many of the areas in safety, and so we keep those in the plan. The changes mostly for, again, regulations that the FTA has changed this year, not our safety procedures.
Okay, great. Any questions?
None for me.
If there aren't any, then I'll entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve R 2018-12-03, authorizing the execution of the authority's amended Transit Agency Safety Plan, or the TASP, as outlined by our Safety Director, Dave Harris.
Great. Second, we'll go to a roll call vote.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item was with Bob Biles and a resolution regarding a granting contract and expenditure authority.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. As you may recall, the implementation of the Public District Act provided that certain controls be put in place. With the prior board, they put in place in May some form of this, and so what you'll see today is a simplified version of what was put in place in May. So the resolution does several things. It talks about new contracts and how those will be approved. It talks about change orders, disbursements, and then some other provisions. So new contracts, before there was executive director, finance and audit committee, and then board. In essence, the Finance and Audit Committee is no longer here, so it simplifies this quite a bit. The Executive Director can approve contracts up to $200,000, and anything over that, you approve. There is an exception. If there is an emergency of some sort that requires immediate action, the Executive Director can sign the contract over $200,000, but that comes to you for your review and just to review it. So this is what it looks like on a graph. Everything to the left of that line, the executive director can do. Everything to the right comes to you for approval. So that's contracts. Change orders is a little more complicated. And again, this is in compliance with the Public District Transit Act. The executive director can approve a couple of things: a contract, as long as a change order, as long as the contract plus change order doesn't exceed $200,000. Again, same theory as an original contract. And then if a contract does exceed $200,000, as long as the change order is under 15% or $200,000, whichever is lower, the executive director can approve that. Anything outside of those parameters goes to the board for approval. Again, there's still the emergency provision here just in case something comes up that needs immediate approval between board meetings. So graphically, that's what it looks like here. The board approves everything above the line, the executive director everything below the line. The break between the 15% limit and the $200,000 limits, $1,333,033. Accountants, we can't help it. We have to do stuff like that. So switching from contracts to disbursement side of the business, the executive director has several approvals. One is if there's vendors that you've approved on Exhibit A, and we'll show you Exhibit A on the next slide, then the executive director can approve that disbursement. If it's on a contract that you've already approved, then the executive director can approve those disbursements. However, if it's over $200,000, we'll report those to you like we did in today's financial statements. And if there's any other payment that's under $200,000, the executive director can do that. If it's over $200,000 and doesn't have one of those exceptions, then it comes to you for approval. And we actually have one on today's agenda for you to look at. And then if there's an emergency, again, the executive director can approve it. It comes to you for review. So here's Exhibit A, and I should note that there's been a change from what was in your packet. The first one, you're going to be considering Alliance Risk Insurance as the vendor of choice instead of the company we had there before. So you'll want to amend in your motion, accept the Exhibit A in your motion. The only changes besides that from what was approved before is we added about the fifth and sixth one down, Vantage Point Mutual of America. The way we do the matching contributions for the employers, those are annual, and we didn't consider those back in May because we'd already made them. And so now we'll be making them here early next year, so we want to make sure that those are included. Generally, these are payments that are fairly standard, either through payroll, health insurance, taxes, payments for electricity, bond lease payments that you've already approved in the budget. And then the procurement card payment, those are in there because the procurements are all low dollar amount, but when they're aggregated, they could be over $200,000. There are some other provisions. Obviously, it supersedes the resolution from May. And then this is key. It prohibits artificial division of contracts, change orders, or disbursements to circumvent board review and approval. So we just do business as normal. We don't take any actions that would bring amounts under your approval action level.
And how do you audit that? Or sort of how do you watch out for that?
Well, procurement obviously looks at that. We've talked before that several groups have a compliance as well as service aspect to them.
Yeah.
So Troy, the comptroller, as he looks at disbursements, he's checking to see if people are trying to submit things between different accounts payable cycles. Normally, they just come through as they come through. It'd be more on the procurement side, and we review those to see if there's sequential purchasing, which isn't allowed, and other things of those nature. So we have some checks.
Okay. Let's see. If there are no other, any questions, Beth?
No.
Okay.
Questions, thank you.
If not, then motion on this particular resolution.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to grant approval to this. We're actually going to have this, call this an amended resolution due to the change to reflect the Alliant Risk Insurance name. So we're going to amend the resolution's Exhibit A to reflect that change. But I'm going to ask for the approval of the amended resolution granting the contract and expenditure authority.
And is that, it amends and adds that to it?
Sorry, I'll redo this.
Sure,
My
no, that's
apologies.
okay. I just want to make sure.
Okay, the motion will be to approve the amended resolution R 2018-12-04 to reflect the Alliant Risk Insurance instead of Aon Risk as UTA's risk insurance vendor listed on Exhibit A, should the contract be awarded to Alliant as proposed in the next agenda item.
Okay. Second, I'll look to a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks. Which brings us now to our Dave Garris in regards to a contract on onboard video security systems or smart drive.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair. This is a contract for Smart Drive. Smart Drive is the camera system we use on our buses. So all of our buses and paratransit vehicles are equipped with the Smart Drive system. It's an automatic recording. It's a system that if the bus accelerates or decelerates too fast or swerves, it automatically takes a video. We get a clip of that video. The one thing that this system does that other systems do not do is that they have third-party review. So there's somebody who looks at each one of these videos and categorizes it as to the severity of the incident itself. So this actually went through a sole source procurement. We have a process that we have to go through to gain approval to sole source it. The two reasons for that being this is the only company that does this third-party review. It's very beneficial for our supervisors and operators. They can then see the incidents themselves and get coached on improved driving performance. And also, if we wanted another company, we would be replacing all the cameras on 630 vehicles. So for those two reasons, we went with the sole source and it was approved. The amount of the contract is actually, it's a 3-year contract with 2 one-year extensions. So if you divide that by 5, it's a little under $300,000 a year. So this would be the entire contract for the 5 years if we keep it on board for that entire period of time.
Any questions?
I just had a couple questions. The first one is, so the third party reviews this footage and then they send a notification to someone in your department, is that correct?
So it's the Smart Drive system. All bus units have access to the Smart Drive system, so they automatically get downloaded their videos. So Central would get all the Central videos, Meadowbrook would get all theirs, Tim. So it goes based on the bus number and the operator at that time. So we don't even have to see them, and so safety can go in and review it, but this goes right to the supervisors and the operators so they can review it in their weekly meetings or however frequently they do that.
Okay. Thank you.
If there are no other discussions, I'll entertain a motion to approve that particular contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval for the onboard video security system Smart Drive as presented by staff.
A second, we'll go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Our next item is in regards to our insurance brokerage service, Dave.
So this was, as Bob alluded to, this is a contract to bring Alliant on board as our insurance brokerage service. As you know, UTA is mostly self-insured, but we do have a level of insurance coverage above the minimums that we carry. This is the broker that annually will renew those contracts for us and get the best value for UTA. This contract comes on board January 1st of next year. Again, it is a 5-year period, 3 standard with 2 one-year add-ons. So the total amount of the $350 divided by 5, again, just under $70,000 a year for these services. What you did, just as an aside, what you approved on the disbursement when we changed it to Alliant is that's actually the distribution of the premiums for the insurance. This is the fees for this broker to provide those services. So that was previously approved for a period of annually. We'll be reviewing that. This is for Alliant. This is a change in our brokerage services. We went through the procurement process. We had 3 submittals. Alliant was selected as the best value to UTA.
So those premiums are really paid through our broker then?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
And so did we well, assuming that we approve this contract, did we technically add them to the exclusion list, or not exclusion, but permitted?
Schedule A, yes, that was the change that was made.
All right. Any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Aligned Insurance Services for the insurance contract starting in January 1st of 2019 for 3 year with a possible 2 1-year extensions.
Motion and second. We'll look to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. They will be very appreciative. They're here Tuesday for the kickoff meeting, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next item is in regards to some 15-passenger rideshare vans with Larry H. Miller.
This contract is for 38 15-passenger rideshare vans. These are replacement vans for our rideshare program. The total contract is $1,176,951. This is a 5-year contract. We anticipate purchasing 10 vans in year 1 and 7 vans the following 4 years of the contract, for a total of 38 vans. All vans being replaced have exceeded their life expectancy of 5 years or 125,000 miles.
And Eddie, how do you pick sort of in the endless discussion? Is it a Chevy or a Ford, or is it something that you found on a state contract, or is there or is that what comes through the proposal by the dealership?
It's what comes through in the proposal. We have about an even mix between Chevrolets and Fords as far as our full-size vans. We have Toyotas for our minivans.
Yeah.
So really, it just comes down there about the same.
About whatever they propose.
Yeah, they're very comparable.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
No questions.
I'll entertain a motion for approval of that contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval to the 15-passenger van rideshare program with the contract vendor being Larry H. Miller Chevrolet for 5 years.
Second, look to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is a contract in regards to JobVite. Kim Uliberry, our esteemed chief people officer. I'm going to get the title right.
Okay.
Tell me what JobVite is.
Is this on? Is the red mean? Oh.
Yeah.
JobVite is a new vendor that we're going with. Our contract expires with our current vendor early next year, but our implementation process takes a bit of time. So we are excited about our work with JobVite. They have some really great options for us that'll help us speed up our recruitment process in this market. In particular, our application process will be easier. We'll have some text messaging features that we don't currently have, better social media integration to get out into the job market better, and better integration with our JD Edwards software, which will actually reduce a significant amount of time in data entry for my team. And of course, that will help reduce any errors that we possibly have. So the details of this contract, it's a 3-year contract with 1 option year. We did go out for a full RFP, best value RFP for this. The total amount of the contract is $386,275. So when you break that down per year, it's a little over $96,000.
Any questions?
No questions. Thanks.
I'll entertain a motion for approval of the contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant the contract to the applicant tracking system to JobVite as presented by staff with a 3-year plus 1 contract.
Second, roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks. Our next item is HireVue.
Yeah.
Now, when I think of HireVue, it's me looking over the crowd, but
Right.
probably has more relevant value. So
That's so interesting. I would not have seen that perspective. No, this is actually our video interviewing software product that we had last year. We went with a one-year contract with them last year because it was kind of a new option and we wanted to test it out and make sure it was something that fit with our hiring, and we've seen some really great successes with it. We did do a sole source on this and renewed our contract for an additional 2 years and actually got a better rate on each of those 2 years moving forward. So our original contract for last year that we've already paid was a little bit over $83,000. We added the 2 years each at an additional $75,000 each year. So the increase to this contract is $151,350. And then the total 3-year contract, and the reason why I'm here today in front of you is that bumped that contract up to $234,725. But this is just another innovative tool for us to speed up the hiring process and find, a better fit in this market, help find good fit for.
I remember reading something on this. It seemed like this is sort of takes you out of the joy of first round interviews, right? It doesn't take you out of the joy, but it minimizes the joy.
Yes, well, it can narrow down the number of people you bring in for that first round.
Okay.
Depending on what type of job you're looking for, you may use a couple more iterations of an interview, but it definitely can help reduce the number of phone interviews. And it also, what we found is that it really has given people better insight into when they looked at their candidates and said, this one looks like they might be a weaker candidate, still bring them in. This gives us a chance to preview that, and we've seen that we find that that first pass on the resume and application isn't always as
Is there I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's fine.
Is there some sort of precaution, or, does somebody else review such that you don't have some kind of, I don't know, profiling's a little bit strong, but you could watch something and just all of a sudden eliminate just when you looked at it. But is there something that says, this is a qualified candidate, why aren't you interviewing?
Well, I can't speak to exactly the analytics. There are analytics that go with this, and if you want, I can ask Pablo to come answer that. But I will say that it's no different than inviting someone generally in the first time you see them. If you're making those judgments on those wrong things, you shouldn't be doing that anyway. So we try to implement that into all of our training for our hiring officials. Do you have anything to add to that? Because it's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the software contains different components, right? We're only purchasing the video interviewing piece.
Okay.
There are other components of the software that do have data analytics that read how one may answer a question, right? Mm-hmm. We're not purchasing that piece of the software. We're not ready for that necessarily. We're using it as a screening tool and to, less than the time we do first interviews.
I have a quick follow-up question on that. So when you first implemented it last year, what was your staff? How did they react to that? What was their thoughts?
Great question. Yes, and at first, right, just like any technology or application, people are a little hesitant about how that may work. And yeah, we experienced that. But through this past year, we have seen a tremendous amount of managers wanting to use this piece of software now because it does reduce the amount of time you spend on first interviews. Oftentimes, for first interviews, you include 10 people, right, at an interview, or maybe 5 to 10 people, depending. And that's a lot of time, right, that people commit to first interviews. Now, the managers have the ability to review someone within 5 to 6 minutes per question. One question may be 1 minute or two, and shorten the applicant pool for the next round.
Can I just add?
Please.
Can I just add one thing? Candidates are also becoming much more comfortable with this software. I think, for those who haven't been in the job market for a while, I think it is a tentative thing for folks. I've heard feedback from folks about that, but as we've talked to our candidates and seen new hires, this is the way this is a tool that's being used by many employers, and candidates who are in the market and have been recently in the market are experiencing this at other employers as well.
Does the applicant have the ability to say, I screwed up in that answer and go back and redo their video, or are we testing them on their spontaneous ability to give answers?
That's another great question. And depending on the position, right, we want some answers to come out straightforward.
Yeah.
And because that will show us their ability to answer questions, on prompt, right? Just like a normal interview would be. Oftentimes in an interview, we ask people we do follow-up questions, right? And that's fine. What we find is those individuals send us emails like, I meant to say this on this question. And we accept that, right?
Sure.
It varies by position and by manager and what they want to see.
Okay.
It is intended to help us find the right fit. And so we don't put all of our, thoughts in there, but it is a screening tool that's been really helpful for us.
If no other discussions, I'll entertain a motion on this contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the video interviewing software of HireView for a additional 2 years on that contract.
Second, roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is a revenue contract, and it looks like, Bob, you're taking this? Or?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Monica had to leave, so I'm sitting in for her. Kinsey Kunkel is here in case I stumble.
Okay.
But what this is, the revenue contract we put in place earlier this year, board approval for certain discounted programs. This is one of them. So the Snowbird group and others similar to them receive a discount on ski bus passes. Based upon their previous experience in the previous contract, this contract's over $200,000. It's $220,000, which requires your approval.
And are these employees working at Snowbird, or are they people who are patrons of Snowbird?
So it includes season passes and employee passes.
Season passes and employees. Okay.
So their ID gets them access to the bus. Is that correct? And or their annual pass.
I'll have to ask someone else if that's how it works.
Looks like you're being saved here.
I am being saved. Yes. It's Kinsey's third day in her new position.
Oh, welcome.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Baptism by fire. So as far as the passes go, the ski resort passes for the season pass holders, their season pass is their bus pass.
Okay.
And as far as employees go, I believe it is their ID, but I would have to confirm if it's a separate UTA issued pass or their employee pass.
Okay.
Thank you.
We had the, and this is probably something to discuss at another time. We went yesterday with police and did fare checking. They did the fare checking. We kind of stood by. And I think one of the challenges for them is there's like 20 different mediums for them to review. And somehow it seems like we ought to get to a consistent medium, whether the contracts are different, that somehow the pass or whatever, takes care of that. I felt a little sorry for them to figure out whether or not what they were looking at was the right thing or not. And I guess it's probably a balance between convenience and but consistency, but maybe something to look at down the road.
So noted.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I'll look for a motion on approval of this contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval to the ski bus pass agreement with Snowbird in the amount of $220,000.
Second, roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Looks like, Bob, you're still up for a light rail parts inventory disbursement to Siemens.
As we mentioned earlier, checks disbursements over $200,000 that's not on Exhibit A or on a prior approved contract come before you. This is an example of one of those type of items. We have a system where we purchase parts to do various repairs. This particular disbursement includes two things. It includes a contract for an overhaul project, a bunch of windows. That's about $180,000 for the light rail vehicles. And then the rest of it is the inventory repairs, just various items that we have to order to do repairs. That was about $205,000 of the 386. So we've provided you with a summary of all the various invoices that made up this. It was 41 purchase orders and invoices that totaled $386,000.
Any questions?
No questions.
I'll entertain a motion then.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval to the light rail vehicle parts inventory list by Siemens for the amount of $386,658.
Second, roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Looking to now any information on pre-procurement, Steve?
Yes, Chair. We have one item on the pre-procurement. So these are items that are starting through the procurement process that you will see in the future as we get consultant selection. And this item, this meeting is for the Depot District project, the construction of the new bus maintenance facility for a hazardous materials management consultant. We know that's a existing rail site, the old Denver Rio Grande Western Railroad locomotive maintenance facility. A lot of maintenance and rail operations happen over there through the years. We know there are waste materials there that we know about, and probably some we may find out about as we go. So we bring on these consultants as kind of an on-call type contract. We're anticipating a contract value of between $300,000 and $500,000, so that we can have somebody in place as they're doing excavation to monitor that for discolored soils or obvious contamination, and then work quickly to notify the appropriate regulatory agencies and do the correct mitigation for that. So we may have to haul it off to a disposal site, or it might be of a level small enough that it could be covered again or dealt with appropriately anyway. So that's upcoming.
Great, thank you. Our next item is a closed session. I'll just say we're going to make a little bit of a change here in that once we go into closed session, we'll excuse ourselves and those who we've invited to be there and we'll just go to an adjoining room. You're welcome to stay here, the rest of you, and then we'll return to this location, and so you don't need to leave if you don't want to. Entertain a motion to go into closed session for the discussion to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we enter into a closed session at this time.
Second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes, and so we'll excuse ourselves and be back. ready, Kathy. Okay. We welcome you back to our open session, and we will be distributing to you, or it's been distributed, resolution that we'll be discussing next in regards to employment for our interim executive director, Steve Meyer. And because this resolution wasn't available before, we'll also open up for public comment after we have an explanation behind it, and then and so if there's any public that want to comment and have that before the vote. So if there are any from the public that want to speak to it, they're certainly welcome to. I'll just maybe just as a preface, and then we'll turn the time over to Kim. As a board, as we looking at the transition, and know that the legislature has given us the responsibility ultimately to have a permanent executive director, and also understanding for some reason Steve's desire to someday retire. So why should you be able to retire just because you've worked your whole life? And but also recognizing that during that period of, and we'll actually have another item where we talk about how we propose to begin the recruitment process for a permanent executive director. We want to have as smooth a transition for the organization as we can, and so we've explored some possibilities of asking Steve to hold off on his retirement, yet respect some plans that he already has in place, and find something that was both fair to the agency and certainly fair to him, and feel like we have some terms that accomplish both. Beth and I are here full time. We're going to be around. The legislature's certainly given us the responsibility for the agency, and we're very fortunate that there's, in addition to Steve, we have some very senior level accomplished individuals who are capable of also carrying out the day-to-day operations of the agency. We've had the privilege over this last month of getting out to nearly all the business operating units. I know there's a few that we're still going to see, but we've had a chance to get and to see the depth of experience in the management of those. Gives me a lot of confidence that the organization is and will be in good hands. And so with that sort of context, turn the time to Kim and talk about a little bit about the concepts in this resolution.
Great. As you've mentioned, Chair, we have been talking to Mr. Meyer about being willing to stay on in the role of interim executive director and delaying his retirement. He has agreed to do that under the certain terms that are laid out here in this proposed resolution. Specifically, I'll just walk through. You've kind of told the story of why he's the right candidate to keep in this role for now, but pretty much we would be looking at reducing Mr. Meyer's work schedule to a part-time, no more than up to 29 hours per week in this role, and increase his hourly rate to $106.25 per hour for his work that he does here. And we would also be willing to pay his two-party health care coverage through his COBRA, because as a part-time employee, he's not eligible for health care in another way through UTA. He would be residing in outside of the state between January and March of next year. And during that time, he would work remotely for us and come into the office twice per month, 2 days a week during those it's kind of 2 weeks per month, 2 days a week during that time. And like I said, would perform the remainder of his work remotely, and we would utilize different video capacities to bring him into meetings and whatnot. Beginning April 1st of next year, and thereafter until this employment ended, he would come in he would be residing in Salt Lake City, and so would come into the office for those hours that he worked. We'd be willing to pay the travel expenses associated with the travel back and forth during those first 3 months, and would provide him with a wireless router for video conferencing through March, the end of March of next year. We'd also provide him with a computer and whatnot, those regular tools that he would need. And Mr. Meyer is would be required and willing to devote his full professional capacity to this role. So he would not be taking on any other work during that time, but all of his working time would be dedicated to UTA. We would also want his employment to terminate on the date that the new full-time executive director started, or any replacement such as that. So it would happen at the same time. And those would be the terms that we would be offering him to stay in this capacity.
Beth, any other comments that you wanted to make or questions you might have?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think one of the challenges that we looked at is, providing the highest level of continuity in this, what is in essence a temporary role for Mr. Meyer. And so with that thought in mind is why we wanted to do it in this fashion. The thought of doing another interim executive director coming in for a relatively short amount of time is a real difficulty in any industry, and certainly UTA would be no exception to that. And we feel that this is going to be a good balance, especially because we're thinking about, we obviously have 2,600 employees that are impacted by our decision making, and we want to make sure that they know that we are transitioning in a smooth and thoughtful fashion. So I just wanted to point that out, and thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. Thanks. Next, go to any public comment. If there's any from the general public, if you just come forward, if you'll just state your name for the record. We'll start with you, George, and if you'll state your name for the record, and we'll ask you to limit your comments to the 2 minutes that we typically do for public comment. Well, it's not his retirement yet, so. Thank you, George. Appreciate those comments. All right, any other public comments at this time? Okay. Well, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of this particular resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution of the Board of Trustees of UTA to establish the terms and conditions of employment for the interim executive director, Steve Meyer, as highlighted by staff.
Second, look to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Steve, for allowing us to do that.
Trustee Holbrook, I appreciate it, and accommodating my needs through this period of time. And our charge is to the Chief People Officer to get this going as expeditiously as possible.
Okay. Well, I'm confident she is motivated, so thank you. We'll next invite Kim back to talk about going forward on the recruitment of an executive director and our game plan and how we might accomplish that.
Yes, thank you. I know, Steve, you have significant interest in this particular discussion point today. Well, I just wanted to give a little bit of context in this discussion about what we've been doing regarding framing the work of the executive director ongoing, and then talk a little bit about where we're headed next with that. I appreciate that you've been willing to meet and talk with the help of a consultant to look at how the changes in governance and the duties of a full-time board really shape this role. And you know, we're still working through that. But as we've worked on that, we've been able to really focus the executive director's duties and responsibility on the performance of the agency. So as we've drafted and looked at creating a job description and looking for the right person to take this role, we've really identified that this person will need to provide a lot of leadership internally and work with you, of course, externally and our other folks externally. But really, their main focus will be leading the day-to-day focus of the agency, aligning the work of the agency around the goals and objectives that you set, allocating resources and across UTA to support those goals and objectives, and that this role would provide guidance to you as you work on developing strategic plans, and that this person would report regularly to you on agency performance, including financial, operational, and administrative activities. And as we put the job together, this person would provide day-to-day leadership to that executive team and would be responsible for reporting again to you regularly on their performance and how they are meeting the objectives that you've set forth. A couple other duties I wanted to highlight just that we've talked about were also monitoring and measuring, and creating a culture of transparency and open communication throughout this agency. And I don't know if you wanted to add or talk about any of that.
I think at this point, our next step would be to secure a firm in helping us, right?
Yes, it is. So our next step would be to get a firm who would handle the full cycle recruitment. We would use the firm to do a thorough search and help us find candidates that are either actively looking for employment or might not be actively looking for employment, but who fit the right job profile. We are looking for a firm who has had experience in both public sector placements, and also we'd like to find someone who has transportation organizations as well. And definitely someone with experience recruiting at that executive level. So we are working today, as we speak, with the procurement department to get those firms narrowed down, and we hope to get someone selected by the end of the year so that we could get this recruitment started. Once we get them selected, then they would work closely with internal staff, and then, of course, directly with you as their client to get going on next steps.
Okay, great. Any questions? Beth?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Appreciate you and your staff and all your work you've done. Next, have an update on discussion on the Salt Lake City interlocal agreement for their transit master plan implementation. Nicole and Laura Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to just begin. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here with Laura Hansen, who is our Director of Planning, but we also have our partners with Salt Lake City, John Larson and Julianne, here joining us as well. So we thank them for attending our meeting as we work through this process. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. Thank you for this opportunity, trustees. Today we're going to kind of dive into the agreement with the Transit Master Plan and implementation with Salt Lake City. Before we go too far, I want to talk about why we're doing this and kind of the ILA and the agreement before I'm going to let Laura dive into the technical details. But the goal of the Transit Master Plan, which was done with Salt Lake City, and UTA together, and I want to say in 2014 was when it began, is really to look at promoting public transit and increase frequency in service. And so what's monumental about this is that both agencies have their goals implemented in here, and they work kind of together to promote those objectives. Also, a really key factor, and I think what's exciting for us is the Transit Master Plan and other components of how this has been laid out and processed has undergone so much extensive public outreach, and will continue to as we work through our processes to implement it. But I think to say to date, the master plan has several outreach opportunities, but also Funding Our Future, which is a component from Salt Lake City of how they were going to use their sales tax funds, looked at housing, transit, roads, and police, and universally transit was supported across all factors. So it's really interesting and really great for us to be able to be at the table to help support those goals. So in your key considerations, this first sheet is kind of talking about, well, what are we trying to do with this agreement and how are we working together? Some of the key highlights here is we're trying to accommodate the Salt Lake City's larger funding future efforts. We also have a responsibility to our stakeholders regionally and making sure that this is all working together. We want to create an ILA from UTA's standpoint that if we wanted to do service in other areas that we can replicate this, and that whatever system we come up with is something that we can take further on. Some other things of note is looking at our budgeting cycle and government processes and agency processes. There's a lot that goes into this. Our service change day, our new service processes, and and also the budgeting cycle and how we're funded and how they're funded. So all of these things took a lot of time to kind of work through. And the last item there of note is that we're working through administrative costs and still negotiating what that looks like and how we implement that or write that up into the agreement. So I'm going to just show some higher level thinking here, and then Laura's going to dive in. But for 2018-2019 Salt Lake City fiscal year budget, the administration, the mayor, put into our budget a suggestion of these numbers. And I think you see here the red highlights what UTA would use for service, and the below is bus procurement. But I think the bigger picture here is to see that this is really a holistic approach to transit and supporting transit in our area. So thanks to Salt Lake City, they've looked at what else do we need to do, and there may be some other items that come before you later on. The City Council is really interested in the transit pass analysis, how we're working together to leverage what we're doing with the service, but also leverage it with access. So this shows you their layout of what went into their transportation administration. And like we said, those numbers in red you've seen in our budget.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Maybe you know, or John. So the 5.3 million, is that a figure that they look at to do through UTA, or are there components of that they'll, aside from city staff, that they'll do through some other method?
So I think it's a little bit of both. As this was all allocated to the transportation department, we will work through our mobilization funds that we're requesting would be part of what this allocation would be. The rest, they're looking for Salt Lake City. They may outsource it. They may we may collaborate on branding and outreach. What is our pass program with Hive and Lyft? So there may be some collaboration, but this is really under the guidance of Salt Lake City. Does that clarify?
Yeah, that helps.
So thinking about that moving forward, back in March, April, May of 2018, the council was presented with, Salt Lake City Council was presented with this looking at it long term. So you saw what the mayor's budget in 2018 allocated. 2019 numbers there show a proposed service implementation. And then there's future funding if all of the route corridors that we're talking about get funded. Here's the approximate amount of money. Just to be clear, I'm going to switch over to these to look at the corridors. To be clear, again, all of this still has to go through our processes. They still have to be blocked and specific, but it's a partnership saying that these are our priorities and we will work forward, and here's the funding allocation as it moves forward. So what we're going to implement in 2019 as part of this agreement is looking at these corridors, the 2nd South, the 9th South, 21st South corridor. That would be that 2019 funding that you saw. And that is part of the ILA, and I'll let Laura dive into all the components, but this is just to give you some great context on what we're looking at. And then in the ILA, it lays out all of the corridors that we'll be looking at. And so the green here is unfunded, meaning we haven't discussed about implementation and when that will launch with Salt Lake City. The agreement has a piece that could be done every year because appropriation would need to be every year. So phase 1 may include 3 or 4 of these routes. The next phase, maybe 2 years from now, or when the city council and the technical team decide that we have the money and the funding and it's the right time. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura to talk about all the great work our team and their team has done to get a really complicated process simplified.
Thank you, Nicole and trustees. So this is a little flow chart or organization chart that describes the structure of this agreement. In the blue boxes, you'll see the master interlocal agreement. The idea here is this is a 20-year agreement, an agreement that has a long horizon intended to demonstrate a long-term partnership between the city and UTA. It does not have any details about specific funding for specific routes. It purely outlines the rules by which we play together. What does the structure of the partnership look like? And it also includes the methodology of how we agree to calculate the cost of service. It doesn't have specific numbers, but it says, here's the formula, here's the process and the methodology through which we'll go to figure out those costs. In the kind of pinkish purple boxes are, so the idea is we'll have a master addendum that lasts several years, and then we'll add, a master agreement will add addendum pieces every year as appropriate for specific pieces of work or specific services. So in the pink is a proposed addendum 1, which would be some mobilization costs. There are some things that we need to get started on soon in order to deliver service in August of 2019. So that includes procuring buses, hiring operators, starting to train them, those kinds of things. And so that would be that first addendum. We would like the master agreement and the mobilization addendum to come to you first. The other 2 boxes will come a little bit further on in the future. The red boxes are capital projects. There's a handful of things that we think we'll be working together on, whether that's a new bus turnaround facility, enhanced bus stops, restrooms for our operators, those kinds of things. We're working through the details of that, and so that will come to you in the future. But it would have a separate addendum and a separate cost associated with it. And the green is the proposed service addendum. So because this current council can't obligate money from future budgets, this will have to come towards June of next year as they're entering their budget cycle for the next year. So the master agreement, I've just got a few bullets here, and I want to thank Julianne and John from the city because I basically just took their same slides. So thanks to them for doing all the hard work. But each section of them, exactly, we worked very well together throughout this whole process. There are a couple different sections within this document, and I'll walk through the main pieces of those. So the recitals really, why are we doing this together? What are we trying to accomplish? Very high level, it references the transit master plan. This is what we're trying to work towards implementing. We share a common intent in making this a great stewardship of public tax dollars, being fair to both agencies, ensuring that our taxpayers and citizens are getting what they're asking for. Section 1 is how we're doing it. We recognize that UTA operates a regional system. The city has its own goals, and so it's how do we balance those 2 needs and make sure that we're meeting the objectives of both. We want to establish permanence and stability so that people can count on these routes, and also make sure that we have good accountability and transparency in reporting with one another and folks can understand exactly how we came to this agreement and why and how to do it in the future. Section 2 is really how we work together. We plan to have a technical decision-making committee that will administer the contract. Execution of the contract and any decisions would fall to the policymakers of both agencies, but we'll have contract administration that's done at the staff level. That'll primarily be between me and John Larson at Salt Lake City as the transportation director, and our teams obviously as well. Section 3 describes the frequent transit network, or FTN routes, that are identified in the city's transit master plan. Part of the complication and the complexity of this agreement is that we have to figure out what is the baseline of service that's on the ground today and what is the city sponsoring on top of that. And so we talked a lot about how do we calculate what the baseline service is. And so the agreement notes that basically we're looking at the service that's on the ground, the change day prior to sponsored agreement, taking out any previous sponsorships. And we want the city's funds to go to routes within the city, not to regional routes. We have other partnerships and ways we can make that happen. Did you have something you wanted to?
I just wanted to make sure that we show that that's the first year in the baseline and then talking about future years.
Right, yeah. So we'll reallocate or readjust. We'll take a look at transit propensity, what we would be providing anyways as an agency, and kind of taking another look and resetting that baseline as appropriate.
That baseline could move a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. You know, assuming that ridership increases or something like that, right?
And we may decide, you know, this is one of our best routes. We think we might take service away from somewhere else to keep this one going while the city's sponsorship moves to a different route, for example. So, thank you for the clarification. Section 4 outlines what UTA's responsibilities are. That's basically what we do right now. We provide the operators, we operate the vehicles, we maintain them, we train them, provide the service itself. And Section 5 is where we get into the complexity. This is the service cost calculation. And so we have based this, it's basically a spreadsheet. It looks like this at high level. But I'm going to go back to this slide here. So we wanted this to be something that was replicable and something that was easy for the public to understand, easy for anybody who wanted to ask, how did you get to these costs? And so the starting point that we added or started with was the National Transit Database. This is a FTA federal website. Every transit agency across the nation has a transit agency profile that's uploaded onto this website. Any member of the public can pull that up. They can compare us with other agencies and see how we compare. And so we chose the operating expense numbers within that and the cost per mile within that as the starting point for this calculator. And I'll switch now just here to walk you through the details of that. So here is the most recent NTD cost per revenue mile for bus service. So this will be a dollar figure. I think right now we're talking about $7.62 right here. Recognizing that we say most recent NTD because they're always kind of a 2-year lag. So the 2017 numbers just were released. So we'll be using a 27 number in this calculator for 2019 service. Does that make sense? So because we're trying to move to service that's 2 years in the future, we want to recognize that there's probably been some inflation since that time. Our labor costs have increased. We know that has happened, and things change. So we have an annual escalator rate within this, and you'll enter in the number of years since the NTD report. And we can provide you these specific numbers as we get a little bit further down the road with Salt Lake City. And then Nicole mentioned that we are still working through an administrative discount. The reason that this is in here is because the NTD number is fully loaded. It includes a Steve, a Nicole, a Laura, our trustees. We don't need to start a brand new agency every time someone wants to sponsor a new route. So we want to be good partners with our city. And so we have a discount there to make that a fair proposition for us both.
And while we don't have a lot of these agreements, is that discount rate going to be sort of set universally so that if there is other agreements in the future, we're using that same rate?
That's our hope.
Okay.
That's our hope, especially looking at how this formula works out, that we could look at that. Right now, we're going to be breaking down what our administrative costs are, because it's not apples to apples. In the NTD, it's everything, facilities, trash. So that's not necessarily admin to other people, that's actual operating costs. So yes, that is our hope, to be able to take that and use it and move it forward.
We're still kind of working through the details of that, but hopefully we'll have a resolution soon. And so because we've structured this around a cost per revenue mile, the key nexus here is how many miles, additional miles, is the city sponsoring. And so we'll plug in the number of new additional annual revenue miles from this new service. Paratransit service. So every time we provide additional fixed route service, we have an obligation to provide equivalent paratransit service. This one's a little different because it's less based on miles and more so on the hours that we operate. And so paratransit service is dispatched as someone calls in and says, hey, I need a ride. Because we're expanding the hours of service with these new sponsored routes, we then have to expand the hours of the paratransit offering.
So do they look at frequency? Is that add to the hours, or?
Frequency doesn't really apply to paratransit because it's each vehicle is dispatched based on a specific call. So yeah, it's more passengers. We have to have someone on call during the hours at which our regular fixed route service is available. Does that make sense? And so we're adding more hours to those shifts. Another variable that we wanted to make sure didn't throw this for a loop is the cost per gallon of fuel. Right now, I think we're budgeting, what, $2.50, Bob, for next year? Yeah. Perhaps all of a sudden something crazy happens and fuel goes to $4 or $5 a gallon. We want to make sure that neither UTA nor Salt Lake City is stuck with a cost that's not appropriate. And so we have a budgeted cost per gallon here, and also the fuel efficiency or miles per gallon for the vehicle. But we also have a true-up clause in the agreement, so that if 6 months in, things have changed wildly, if the change is plus or minus 30%, we have an ability to true that up with the city and in the agreement.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So if that, so when you talked earlier about an annual escalator, that escalator specifically does not include fuel. And then this fuel portion is going to simply be adjustable on a more frequent basis. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah, we took the original NTD cost per mile and we stripped out fuel. We stripped out vehicle depreciation and paratransit, and then we're adding them back in because we think there's a chance that they're a little bit more variable. So we wanted to start with the base cost without those pieces in it, and then add those back in with the ability for us to modify them as needed.
So that would look like, so if fuel costs vary significantly, like how often would that look like contractually? Would that be quarterly? Would it be?
It's annually.
It would still be
annually.
it's
biannually, excuse me. Okay. So it's a 6 months true up of that drop. And that was something we worked with operations to say, can you budget that long? And they're like, yeah, 30%, just to make sure that we could still run the buses. We're not missing out on money extreme. And there's some other things. And they said, yeah, 6 months in Salt Lake City, that's good. And it also, if fuel just was reduced. So fuel doesn't necessarily mean gasoline in this instance. It could be our CNG or electric prices.
So you would say maybe the fuel cost would be per kilowatt hour rather than per gallon, and the fuel efficiency of the vehicle would be modified to address that as well. And that's a key component for the city. And then we need some additional vehicles. Currently, we are stretching our buses to cover the maximum number of area, and to add the frequency and the span that is being requested here, we need some additional vehicles. So this is the annual vehicle lease cost in this box here, and the number of vehicles that we'll be purchasing.
So just really quick, if we have a designated sponsored vehicle that we utilized in this contract, then the fuel price would just be for that vehicle. Is that right? Because if it's designated as a diesel, for instance, then we lease X number of diesels, then there wouldn't be an escalator for anything else except for diesel, right?
It's a little more complicated than that, because find a lot of efficiencies and savings within our system by doing something called the interlining, where a bus may run on one route and then it turns into a different numbered bus route. And so instead of just going back and forth on a single line, it may change from the 9 to the 209, for example. I just picked that arbitrarily. Eric's ears burning, and he doesn't know why. But
They're
so
tease endlessly about
Now you're going to be known as 209.
yeah, I know. But it's very difficult for us to keep a single vehicle running on a specific route. We just don't dispatch them that way. And if there's a maintenance issue, we need to be able to put a different vehicle in place to operate that same route. And so leaving that flexibility allows us to have a lot more savings, but also to be able to keep service operating. And so that's one of the challenges with moving to electric vehicles, for example, is we can't guarantee that it will stay on just this one route.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure. So that's it on the financing. Any other questions on this before I move along? Okay, perfect. So Section 6 outlines the entity's responsibilities for the FTN routes. They will be providing a mobilization cost to us only whenever we add new service. That's that ramp up. They'll be supporting the vehicle lease costs, the new annual service miles. There may be some other costs, such as partnering on capital improvements. Again, I mentioned that it's subject to an annual appropriation because you can't obligate a future council. And some construction of bus stops may be more cost effective for the city to actually build those, and then we take on some basic maintenance responsibilities. Section 7 talks about our invoicing process and payment terms. Section 8 is that mid-year fuel cost adjustment that we talked about. Section 9 is other improvements, and I am drawing a little bit of a blank on that one.
It doesn't exclude us from making other improvements to the system with RTP or other funding. And in fact, both Salt Lake City and us want to capitalize on both those funding sources to make the system more cohesive. But it's just to say that there's no other improvements. And also that if we wanted to add an addendum into this that says now we're doing fares, 2 years from now or something, we could do that as well.
Thank you. Section 10, no supplantation of funds. 11 is open financial records. These are sort of basic things. 12, performance evaluation. So this is in the city's transit master plan. They have some performance evaluation goals. Ridership is one, as is air quality, as is access to jobs and education. So there's both qualitative and quantitative measures that we're working there. Open data sharing. We plan to share information back and forth with one another. And then sections 13 through 30 are termination clauses, that sort of thing, governmental immunity.
Sorry. The performance evaluation portion of that, is that going to be an annual as well, or maybe every couple of years, or how would that look? And would both entities be required to sign off on any goal changes or modifications of that kind?
I think when we should probably show how this is presented. It may be evaluated by year, but the goals may not be set by year. So something like some of these routes before they hit what the IPR is or what the expectation of ridership, or even looking at commercial development over an area like the 9th South is prime for that. Those goals may be set on 2 or 5 year kind of time frames. However, I think the technical team will be looking at this saying, okay, is this still right? And then our dashboard, there should be 3 or 4 kind of, I'm hoping dynamic. Our team's working really hard to show some dynamic information of how we're performing. So there may be some public dynamics that way, but the actual reporting on some of these goals would be later on, longer than just a year basis, because it takes two years on average for the ridership or the route to gain its full potential.
So addendum 1 is the mobilization. This is the first addendum that you'll be seeing along with the master agreement. Our goal here is to have sort of a one-time lump sum payment, but we've outlined here the types of things that would go towards mechanics, supervisors, dispatch training, fuel and parts, those kinds of things. Addendum 2, I mentioned, might be some capital improvements at some point in the future. This is a rendering out of the city's transit master plan. What actually ends up on the ground will be something, similar, but maybe different from this. But this gives you an idea of what their vision is. And then 3, I mentioned that we've already started talking about what the service might be in 2019 and the costs associated with that, but we need to wait until the next budget cycle to finalize that one. And I believe that is the end.
Remind me where the city is in their approval process, and sort of what would be our projected timeline on our approval process?
Right now, our approval process, we need to finalize the last language in the ILA, and then Salt Lake City would send their transmittal into their council. The council doesn't have it scheduled for January yet, but has said that they're expecting a mid to late January adoption.
Okay, so we would look to something shortly after, I assume, or maybe...
Or even before, as long as the language in the agreement is on the same lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you. Thanks for that update. And thanks for your work to get it to this point. So we really appreciate it. It'll be an exciting opportunity. So, Steve, tell us about service agreements in Utah County.
Okay. So as we've worked... UVX, we received a loan from the Utah County third quarter, and as they were looking at the fourth quarter, we entered into an interlocal agreement last October where we said, we committed to pay that back within the realm of the potential of the fourth quarter. And within that, we agreed to a service level agreement, which would give the opportunity for the county to participate in discussions about service increases as well as capital improvements within Utah County. So we're in the process of that. We've discussed with you offline a little bit about our processes for capital projects and service, and we've talked about a flow chart of on the service side, 5-year, 2-year planning, and then implementation, a change internally to really focus on an August change day every year to make that happen. And now how to integrate with the changes in SB 136, the requirements for the Board of Trustees to provide approvals at certain points, the requirement for the local advisory board to provide some approval of service plans, and then integrate that with an opportunity for Utah County to weigh in. Now, this more formalizes and specifies a process that we've already had. We've had ongoing where we talk to the local jurisdictions and the counties about service growth over time. And we have our change day process where there's public hearings and meetings and talking about that. This would expand that and formalize specifically the county approval of that process. So as you see on this chart, this looks at the regional transportation plan that Wasatch Front and Mountain Lands come up with. So in Utah County, we would be dealing with Mountain Lands Association of Governments in the regional transportation plan, looking at service improvements. In the past, we haven't included a lot of that in the long-range plan, so we'd look towards trying to inform service improvements in that long-range plan, as well as normally what we cover as the capital improvements. As we get into the 5-year plan, we're getting more detail, and that's likely where we want to, as we finalize our 5-year plans, get the county buy-in at that point. Then we go into more of a 2-year plan where we're getting into the details of that. The county has said in their agreement this is major service changes. It's not change of a bus stop to clear a new development in a driveway or small changes like that. These are major new service increases. So then we talk about the 2-year service planning process, and then the actual end of that last year, the change day process where we're actually cutting the runs and that. So it defines that role for the county. So the county met Tuesday, and Trustee Holbrook was there and discussed our intent to get that going. Right now with the interlocal agreement, it says that no service or capital improvements can be made by UTA until a service level agreement is entered into. And if you look at the waterfall, what we call, of the funds coming in and our commitments in that interlocal agreement, our commitments are to pay off the debt, take over the operation and maintenance. And so we look at that, and we're in the 2028 time frame, thereabouts, depending on financing costs and things like that, before we would get to a point, probably projecting that far out, where we would have funds available then to do service or capital improvements in Utah County.
Maybe 2023, right? I mean, if you're looking 5 years.
Well, after we get all these other payments made. So we don't those funds flow to Utah County, and what that effectively does is free up money that had been committed from their third quarter and allows them, generates about $8 million back that they can use for road improvements. And I think the cities are very supportive of trying to get that. They have a lot of needs there. And as the fourth quarter goes forward, that would help meet some of those needs with current year dollars, where they were looking at future year dollars getting somewhat eaten up potentially by inflation. So getting those dollars sooner gives them higher amount of purchasing power. So that's the process. Yeah.
So the repayment piece from the fourth quarter, I assume that's the 40% that would go to UTA.
That's correct.
Would go to pay back their third quarter
right.
loan. Right?
So the other 40% that goes to the cities, the 20% that goes to the county, those would still go to those entities. We're talking about how we would initially use that 40% for UTA. So that's the process we're working on. We've scheduled a meeting with Commissioner Ivey for next week. So we hope to bring this forward and show them, some good effort and get some comment back from them. None of us, I think, had a really clear vision of what a service level agreement would cover when that initial document was created. So this is an opportunity for that process. Now, as the local advisory board has this approval process over capital projects, over service projects, we believe that it's appropriate that they have the opportunity to look at this plan before we take any action on that. So we'll be looking to January, February timeframe for that group to get a chance to weigh in on that with their comments, and then hopefully we're converging on agreement to be able in February or March to move towards agreement on that service level agreement with Utah County.
Any questions, Beth? Okay, good. I think it brings us to the beloved other business, which is our next meeting scheduled for January 9th at 9 a.m. I think that's it, unless I'm forgetting something. Thank you, everybody, for all that you've done to prepare. We know it's been a little longer than usual, but we appreciate your participation. With that, I'll call for a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chair, I really wanted to say really quickly, too, just in case anyone had noticed, we are actually trying to be more electronic. So we're killing a little fewer trees, which is why we have our computers, just in case you were wondering. So we're looking at our full packets. And I had forgotten to mention that earlier. With that being said, I would love to make a motion for adjournment.
Okay. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you.